Hello, and welcome to this edition of CIBER Focus, your source for international business news. My name is Taylor, and with me today is Jessica Lee, Associate Professor of Education Policy, Organization, and Leadership at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Professor Lee is on campus today to talk about her current research in human resource development and the effects on the changing work environment in China. Professor Lee, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Taylor. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Good to have you here. So your research primarily focuses on human resource development. What exactly is human resource development, and how does that affect doing business internationally?
Well, human resource development is a field that focuses on, I guess in a sense, like unleashing the potentials of individual, team, and organization. So in terms of doing business in Asia, internationally, certainly I can kind of address it from a few different perspectives. First of all, when you go international, you have to have issues with different type of culture and then different type of languages. But we kind of primarily target as how cross-cultural communications. That's one aspect of it, and how you familiarize yourself with the business practice in another part of the world when you do business internationally. In terms of how to train, how to prepare your employees when you go overseas to conduct business, or when you're working with people from other countries to have business transactions. So you need to prepare yourself and how you communicate, how you facilitate the process and get your stuff done. That's part of the training we can provide as a field, to the employees to prepare them for that. And as a field, we kind of primarily cover three fields, like we do training and development. We have organizational development. We also focus on employees' career development. Mm-hmm.
Okay. In each three of those sections, do you have different training and different protocols to do those different types of business, or what would be examples of that?
Okay, for example, for training and development, it's primarily focused on employees to upgrade their skills in terms of either technology-related skills, like maybe directly relate to their production or their business, or that kind of thing, but also how to be a good leader, how to be a good manager, mm-hmm. How to negotiate. Right, so those will be kind of covered by what we do in terms of training development. Obviously we have a process for it. We do needs assessment, we design and develop, and then we deliver those training programs on target and meet the needs of the employees. But in terms of organizational development, mostly focusing on how to managing change. When a organization, a domestic organization, are trying to develop their international business, they have to experience some change, right? In terms of how you, either you move to a different location, or you set up an office in a different location, international site. So there's a lot of organizational change, in terms of how you structure your teams, how you structure your processes. So there's how are we going to deal with those changes? How are we managing those changes? How we prepare our employees to go through those changes, right? So we can change successfully. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that as we will talk about organizational development, we'll be covering. And career development is very obvious. So we're looking at how we can help the employees to map out their career projections, like projections. Right. Where they want to be in 5 years and 10 years. It's changing. The field is also changing. In terms now. The young people may kind of the career orientation may be a little bit different than the folks 20 or 30 years ago. Right. They may looking at develop their career within one organization, but now they may be looking at develop a specific skill set so they can be needed in other different places. So so those are the things we'll consider in those particular subject areas. Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's a lot of details when you're having to plan the different training activities and organizational structural differences mm-hmm. when doing business internationally. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you were also discussing today on campus how the rapid development in China has impacted people's work-related values and attitudes. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with the people or in China?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Generally, when I work Well, I have to talk about the year, the period of time I was working in China as a business executive. That was in 1995 to 2002. I was worked for both as a business executive at Motorola and Nokia in their Chinese operation. At that time, my sense of the people that I was working with, they're very eager to learn, but they have some kind of a lack of international experiences, international business experiences, and how to operate or how to work in multinational organizations. Sometimes I feel like as a manager, we need to provide more of guidance and mentoring and coaching, because sometimes because of lack of reference, so they just don't know what to do or what to ask. It's not because of laziness, it's just because of lack of reference. So as a manager, you need to be aware of that when you deal with, especially some of the emerging countries, when you go to business internationally. You need to be more patient and to understand that they may have the same, different frame of reference in terms of how to conduct business or how to work in a multinational organizations, how the project is done, how the team is facilitated, how the work was facilitated. So those things, I think, especially as Americans, when you go overseas, you need to be mindful of that so you can work with the people from the other countries in a more smoothly, I guess. Mm-hmm.
And so when you said that employees do not always know what to do and how to get the opportunities and really realize what's going on in their organizations, do you see that just in a specific country or culture, or is that internationally?
Well, I think it's probably internationally, because it's really about the frame of reference. Like, let me give you a really simple example. It's a more of a day-to-day life example. There may be a cleaning crew show up in your apartment and trying to help you clean, and they have 3 people show up with 1 bucket and a mop. How they're supposed to clean, how good a job they're going to do, right?
Right.
So the idea is, because the reference they have, the conditions they live in, there's not much cleaning you need to do. So it's really about understand where they're coming from and be patient, and provide the necessary coaching and mentoring. Sometimes even bring them to the U.S. and then to understand some of give them some contextual information, on what the company is about, where it's operated. Certainly give a sense of understanding of where the headquarters, what's the culture of the headquarters of the organization. So, and then you can start bridging the local office, different region local offices with your headquarters. And you can have a better communication because you have a better understanding of each other. So those are, I think, important strategies to be, to do.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting. Well, kind of going along with that culture, the different cultures within an organization, your study focuses on examining the differences in work ethic between the college students and their parents' generations. What changes have you seen in work ethic between those 2 different generations, and what are the implications these changes have had on research and development?
Yeah, I actually have a little cheat sheet here because it's work ethic is a multidimensional construct. I think in generally when you're trying to look at that, first of all, we have to validate, is the generational difference significant? Is the difference is big enough that demands a different policy and practices? Okay, so I think that's kind of what I did. I find there are a significant generational difference in terms of, And then the second one is to really look at what consists in terms of their work ethic or work-related values and attitudes. So I think in what I was kind of researching on the subject, I find, certainly hard work, how we see, like we all want people who work hard, right? But there's purpose in terms of why you want to work hard, right? What drives you to work hard is different. What I find in China is, especially for that a generation who are a little older, they turn to work hard because they want to get certain rewards. And rewards are often determined not by a kind of a standardized evaluation process, but more by the word of the manager or the boss of the organization. So you can see under that kind of structure, people are turned to work hard to please the boss. So this kind of the younger generation are somewhat a little different because they have grown up with more means, more fluent. They have more disposable income. So in a sense, they work maybe a little less to pleasing the boss, but rather to demonstrate their own values, trying to realize their own identity or something. So that's that's one thing I see a change. Another is let me talk about time and also talk about the leisure at the same time. The older generation, time is about continuous work. When I was talking with them, they're very willing to put long hours or sometimes even like really add hours just to get the production quota, finish the production quota. And they spend a lot of time at work because that was kind of required, like that was required. So they are about to be, to keep the production running, to produce the product. And many of the people I interviewed, none of them actually had any vacation for however long they work for the organization, 10, 20, 25 years in that sense. It's not like they don't have a policy of vacation. They do have, in the company where you have 5 days or 10 days vacation, but nobody's taking it. So if you're taking it, you're considered not a devoted to the workplace.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, but young people are much less than that. A leader is very important, and they have different kinds of leader activities. Vacation is certainly one of them. American pop singers like Lady Gaga and Justin, whatever, Bieber, are all very popular in China now among the young people who kind of grew up, born after the 1980 or 1990 in that kind of generation. So leisure becomes they're looking to balance their the work-life balance and they value what leisure can bring. So in another sense, they're looking to develop a different set of part of kind of leader activities, so they can develop like a holistic person, maybe not just about work.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Especially with the younger generation. I mean, you said earlier that with the older generation, they look more towards pleasing their bosses and making sure that everything's on time. But with the younger generation, they're more personally led, but yet they relate so much to this leader or leadership ideal.
Right. I mean, again, like I'm in here when I talk about it, I just want to qualify it because I'm talking about more of the elite, more well-trained a group of people. And there's actually, I think we all hear the war for talent, right? In China, there's, same thing like India and Russia and Brazil, those are the BRIC countries. I'm pretty sure you talk about it in your classes. Because of the rapid development in those countries, and there a huge demand for talents, high-level talents, well-skilled, well-experienced, people who are able to deal with the work demands from a globalized economy. working with people from different countries, working in different countries. So those are the people like we were talking about. So they kind of right now they demand their more of the balance, work-life balance. But they also, because the reason they are able to demand that is because they are highly sought after. So they, in other words, they can find job rather easily. So you're not providing that, they can find another job. If the job, if nobody is calling them about another job. So the talent retention for this group of people is a huge issue in Asia. Well, in Europe also, I think, but less of an issue. I think when they did the survey, the conference board did the survey. In Asia, it has been #1 issue, business issue for as a consecutive number of years. And in European, I think they were maybe looking for more innovations. But when you think about innovation, it's all depend on people.
Right.
And I think the U.S. is also about innovation and profit, maintain the sustain the profit of an organization. But it has to do with where they are in terms of the economics. Because the U.S. has been struggling a little bit in the past few years. That's why maybe the sustainability of the organization is more important than. But without people, how you can sustain the competitiveness and the profitability of the organization? So it's come down all about people.
So international experience is becoming a lot more necessary for the younger generations then, in providing and getting jobs internationally. Are there things in human research development that's going on right now where, like we talked about economic means, if you don't have the economic means to really get that international experience, are there things in organizations that they're trying to do to help their employees get that experience at a lower cost?
Yeah, I did a study actually in some of the Asian large multinational organizations. There's many programs the organizations are doing, like job rotations, overseas assignment, special projects. So they, there's a number of ways you can get that international experience. Well, in Indiana University alone, you can get international experience by interacting with other international faculties, international visitors, international students. I think the more we interact with people from another culture, the more sensitive we are, or the more aware we are about the differences between the people from different cultures. So you take a pause and then you think, maybe he or she said something is not because she didn't like it or just because she didn't understand the background or something. So you want to kind of maybe dig deeper, trying to present, the more fuller context and create the understanding. And that's the most important thing in international business is to create that kind of common understanding.
Okay, yeah, because it seems like, 10 years ago, there weren't nearly as many people going abroad to gain valuable skills, and I feel like the differences are now coming to a change in perspective rather than differences, and people are seeing more of the similarities or different mindsets.
Yeah.
But.
Right. I really encourage people, if they have the opportunity to live in another country for a period of time. It's really eye-opening experience. Actually, by living in another country, you actually appreciate your own culture and your own country more, believe it or not. So that's actually is a very valuable experience. If anybody has opportunity to do that, I really encourage them to try to do that.
That's very good insight.
Or learn another language.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. And I kind of want to switch tracks a little bit here. Our audience includes both professional and students. And for the students out there, can you talk a little bit about your career path and how you came to be the professor that you are?
Okay.
And doctor.
All right. I actually start right about I finished my PhD. I had the opportunity to attend a workshop offered by a director from Motorola. And the talk was very interesting. And then we had some kind of discussions and debates afterwards. And then because I also had some engineering background. And the director was very interested in my background, so he was said, why don't you send me a resume? And I said, okay, that's great, and I did, and I got the job. So obviously I go through some of the interview process as well. But I think what kind of sort of get me into the business at that point, one thing is the combination of engineering and then the human side of it, the human development side of it also. Yeah, so I started in business. The first company I work for is Motorola. It's in Chicago. And the organization I joined is called Motorola University. And it's a kind of internal organization that focuses on employee development. So the reason they call it Motorola University is a kind of a branding purpose, to give it a new branding image, and then has kind of a levitate the status of the organization. It just shows that how important they think employee development is. That's why in 1994, Motorola University is very famous at the time among large organizations, corporate universities, because there's a kind of a movement on how to develop your employees, and so they can be more competitive, so they can be more productive, be more innovative. So those are that's how I got started. So and then the competitor of Motorola is Nokia. They sort of, because they were trying to develop their employees, so they form a learning center. And then they know Motorola is doing really well, so they talk with me, and something I can't refuse, so I just went over to work for Nokia. And it was very interesting because Nokia is a Finnish company, and Motorola is an American company, obviously. And then they both have a long history. And then they both, at the time, were into mobile communications, mobile phones and two-way radios, that kind of telecommunication equipment and mobile device and stuff. I was fascinated by how the two companies, the culture of two different companies are so different. Nokia are much more like, you can call it, at the time, are more driven by maybe by European culture, are very kind of, I want to say fast moving, but the decision making process are very informal. Well, Motorola is a very formal organization. But both organizations are doing wonderfully at the time. They're growing rapidly and doing business in a lot of different countries. So after that, I went to work for a smaller company in Ohio called Antioch Publishing, and I find myself are rather drawn to large organizations instead of smaller ones. So I went to Raytheon. It's a pretty large corporation. It's in the defense contractor. During this process, I learned quite a bit, and it's challenging. You feel sense of accomplishment because you got things, the project after project, you got things happen, and you get promoted, and you're doing well, and financially and everything. It's really challenging, but I just felt like I had something to say. And I want to say something in terms of how, so I want to have a chance to really study what's driven those, kind of what we're doing, the best practices, why it is the best practice, how we can improve it. So I want to do some research about what have done in business environment. So that's when I have a sense that, okay, so I want to do some research. and where to be, the best place to do research, universities. So that's how I decided, okay, 10 years corporate environment, I accumulate some really good experiences and success stories or failures, in a sense. And so I thought, maybe it's time for me to synthesize a little bit and then write about it and do something about it. So that's when I decided to try the academic career. So my first academic job is in Texas A&M in College Station. Mm-hmm. It's sort of it's a little similar but different than Indiana University here. It's a college town. It's not very big. Mainly it's the university. And then, for family reasons, I moved to near Dallas. And then my husband is doing international business himself, so he travels so much, it really doesn't matter where I am. Mm-hmm. So I moved to University of Illinois to continue my academic career because I like the research university environment, so I'd be able to do more research. And that's kind of the story of my career.
Do you think you'll ever go back to corporate America, or do you think that you're content in your research or consulting work maybe with?
Mm-hmm. I never feel like I left practice, totally. Mm-hmm. I still want to do research, in practice. What I find one thing is there really is a gap between academia and practice, the practitioners world and the scholarly world. Mm-hmm. So I take one of my roles is to bridging this gap, so to do research for the people who are actually going to use it, use it. So I even though I'm in academia, and to survive in academia, you have to do certain things. You have to be published, you have to write scholarly papers. But I never feel like I totally was kind of abandoned my practice, my practitioner's perspective, and I want to keep that going. That's why I'm, still doing research and talking with different companies. I just mentioned earlier I was doing a talent retention project for some of the based in Asia multinational organizations. So I was interviewing their HR executives and HR directors to get different perspectives and see how they're doing it, and then try to develop a kind of a process and how you approach the idea of talent retention. Mm-hmm. So it's not, So I guess one point I want to emphasize, at least for that particular research, is so, even though like there's a lot of best practices, but when you're really looking at it, you want to have a sense of who you are. What's your corporate mission? Like what drives you? What's your culture? And then after you understand that, and then develop your talent retention strategy, and that's fit with the culture. That's that's most important. So if the policy, if the strategy and culture is not fitting, it's very, very difficult for you to be successful. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting how much culture actually really does play a part in international business, and I'm sure your students are very happy that you have all this international experience to better prepare them and, like you said, close that gap between academia and...
Right. Yeah, my experience really helped me. Like sometimes when I'm teaching a class, I just call a colleague, and the other day I actually have someone from Saudi Arabia. I'm teaching an international HRD class, and I have a colleague now is working in Saudi Arabia, just Skyping in and talking with my students. Another one from Korea, another one from India. Now I bring international HRD to life instead of just me sitting there talking about international HRD. Yeah. So that's kind of that kind of background do really help me to bring what people are actually doing into the classroom. Right. Yeah, and so that's very helpful also. Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Mm-hmm. I would love a class with people from all over the world being able to come and talk. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And with technology, do you see that also playing a huge role in different types of developments that are going on? Or?
Oh yeah, definitely. globalization and technology are two big drivers that will change, how we do business today. With, I think one I'm trying to grow in a passion is for the mobile, internet-supported mobile technologies that really actually allow you making decisions right on time, just there and learning something new and making decisions right away. So you get the correct information, just like we need to make sure that person gets the right information. So if we give people the right information just in time, that person can make the right decision just in time. So technology do play a huge part in the success of, another thing I talk about is globalization. The two things that are going to change how we do business.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So aside from globalization and technology, are there any things on the horizon that you're particularly excited about or that you think will pose even challenges in the near future?
Well, another thing is like change demographics in terms of workforce. Not only like we have different generations of people are entering the workforce, people are more familiar with technology, that's a good thing. But also they may have different sets of values and attitudes, which I talked about earlier. So how are you going to address the difference of the generational differences? And there are also a change in terms of demographics because the low birth rate in some of the countries. And so you're going to be experiencing an aging workforce. Like for example, in China, because of the one-child policy, the only segment of workforce is growing right now is 50 and above.
Wow.
Yeah, so you're going to experiencing those changes. So as when you do business internationally or domestically in that manner, you're going to be aware. You need to be aware of the composition of workforce. We have diversity is another thing, the participation of females in the workplace, and how you're going to address the different needs. In terms of that particular issue is very challenging in other part of the world, especially when you are doing business, like for example in India. Or the Middle East, there's a pretty big discrepancies between different genders. And in China, I have to kind of a little disappointing. The gender gap is actually increasing instead of decreasing. Because the traditional values coming back, as Confucius values coming back, and that create that that kind of increase, the trend of increasing in that manner. So, so you need to kind of aware of those issues when you go into. They're going to become more and more important. Because the shortage of talents, you want women to be participating in the workforce equally, right? So you want you to have enough people in the work. So you may you have to keep the older workers, but how are you going to train them the new techniques or new technologies? Have them to keep up to speed with how they didn't grow up with the mobile device that the people like your age are doing, right? So that will be a challenging for future business leaders. Yeah.
I just think about, with the multinationals in the future, do you think that being that business is so global, those values, for example, in China with the old traditional values coming back, do you think that will turn around? Or do you think that technology, how do you think that would affect?
To be very honest, I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't think the traditional values is going to go away. It's just how you balance it. Confucius never said anything that, women should be disrespected or anything. In the contrary, he actually said you should respect women. But he just kind of, he put in place of a order of things to keep the, harmony and stuff. But I think it's more, there's a couple of things. I think the first thing, it needs to build awareness. A lot of awareness needs to be. Let me share kind of experience. I was just recently did a little tour Singapore, and when I was in Singapore, I met two HR executives, a lady and a gentleman. So we were at a conversation, we were talking about, I was doing a research, talking about different things. And then somehow the conversation came to about gender issues. And then they both agreed that people in Asia, successful women in Asia, don't want to talk about the gender difference because they don't want to be perceived as someone who was only successful before they're female, and they take advantage of certain policies or something. They just want to be successful because they are successful. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to talk about it. So people who are successful don't want to talk about it. And then during the conversation, somehow the conversation went to talk about the current prime minister of Thailand is a woman. And the gentleman was, and certainly she don't want to talk about it. She never talked about it. She was getting that position because she's a woman and there are certain characteristics and stuff. But she did mention as a woman, as a prime minister, she has some special skill set that make her more effective as a woman to be a prime minister. But what's interesting is the comment that gentleman made. He said, well, the reason she was able to survive for that long is because she is a woman and she's a beautiful woman. So there's just there's a lot of things hidden. Even people don't realize it. They don't talk about it, but there's still a huge difference. People don't recognize it. So the first thing they need to be aware. They need to talk about it, right. Make it an issue, and then solve it. If you pretend the problem is not there, you never deal with the problem. So I think that's what's the problem right now. Is the problem, people just don't want to deal with it in Asia. Okay. I think that's one area. Mm-hmm.
It's very valuable insight. I've never even thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. Well, do you have any advice for current business students or recent graduates that you could talk to us about?
Go east. Yeah, I think if you think about international business, there's a lot of emerging markets. It's actually in the east part of the the emerging economies. Mm-hmm. If you have opportunity, I really you should go and see. And work in different places for a couple of years, gain some international experience. A few years down the road, you're going to be valuable, for any organization, because now everybody wants to do business in China, in India, in Brazil, in Vietnam, in Thailand. So familiar yourself with some of the cultures, and pick up some of the languages, and gain some experiences. In terms of work ethics, there's a dimension called delay of gratification. So you take a couple years as your learning experience, and you will gain that, in the long run. So so that would kind of advice I will give, go east.
Well, that concludes this edition of CIBER Focus. Thank you, Professor, for coming to speak with us today. Mm-hmm. And also thanks to the East Asian Studies Center for hosting Professor Lee on campus today. If you have any questions or for future topics, please contact CIBER@indiana.edu.